Friends, welcome to the 126th session of Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. The journey continues. We have been getting new thoughts, new ideas. We are exposing ourselves to different concepts, and altogether the very basic concept being empowerment through interaction. Today, thanks to Advocate Jayman Andrews, we have a wonderful speaker who is a senior advocate of the Supreme Court, Sri Vikas Ranjan Bhattacharya ji. And may I welcome today the speaker, Justice V. Ramkumar sir, Justice Kodanda Ram sir, and all of you wonderful participants to this 126th Legal Empowerment Through Interaction lecture series. And to kick off, may I just request Advocate Jayman Andrews to introduce the topic and the speaker in a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Shyam. And I know Mr. Sri, our today's speaker is a respected person. He is a senior lawyer. He was initially practicing before the Kolkata High Court. He is a social worker also. He is recently elected as a member of parliament from the Rajya Sabha member from West Bengal Assembly. He was mayor of Kolkata Municipal Corporation. He was advocate general to state of Tripura once. And he's a wonderful lawyer, wonderful human being. And he is also heading All India Lawyers Union in the national level now. And he is proving to be a very good parliamentarian now, because I know the sessions are not on now, because when we invited him, there was session. So that's why we arranged like this, but due to COVID, it was cut short. Now, and all other things are there. But thank you very much, sir, for accepting this invitation. Initially, we were having a day-to-day program, but after court started, we were doing only on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But for your convenience, since you gave us a date and the topic is a current relevance, we don't want to prolong this to some other day. So we opted for Monday also, and tomorrow also I think we are having another session on another issue. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation and joining us. I'm not talking anything on the subject now. You everywhere know that recently the parliament has passed 3 laws directly, which is having directly affecting upon the farmers of the country. There may be difference of opinion among the persons who is among us also, but the sir will be delivering his address on his views on the current subject, and welcome you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you all for giving me an opportunity to really address you. It's my good opportunity to see all of you, though virtually, and coming to meet each other virtually. Now we are living in a virtual world. And this virtuality is preferred by many because they do not want to really feel the pulse of the people and also the ground realities of their own difficulties. But we have to assess and judge everything in the context of the principle of governance. Now, let us see, why did the India after independence preferred for democratic governance? If I may quote from Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, quote, "We have definitely accepted the democratic process. Why have we accepted it? Well, for a variety of reasons. Because we think that in the final analysis, it promotes the growth of human beings and of society. Because, as we have said in our constitution, we attach great value of individual freedom. Because we want the creative and adventurous spirit of man to grow. It is not enough for us merely to produce the material goods of the world. We do want high standards of living, but not at the cost of man's creative spirit, his creative energy, his spirit of adventure, not at the cost of all those fine things of life which have ennobled man throughout ages. Democracy is not merely a question of elections. The question before us is how to combine democracy with socialism through peaceful and legitimate means. Now, when the Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was making this statement, kindly keep it in mind that the constitution was already adopted. And the constitution's main theme, I don't have to go to the big volume of constitution, which is the preamble. I will just place the preamble, and I'm sure that all of you must have had gone through the preamble number of times. But it's still, I am really tempted to read the preamble, which is the foundation of the governance of the Indian democracy. The preamble says that the people of India, we have given unto ourselves the constitution. What is the constitution? What is really constitution thought of? It says to secure to all its citizens. I am not reading that socialist democracy. Forget about that. That was amended portion. Therefore, I'm keeping it aside. But what was the original there? Justice, social, economic, and political. Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Equality of status and of opportunity. This is more fundamental. And to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual. I stress upon this word, the dignity of the individual, which was incorporated by Mr. Ambedkar at the 11th hour of making the draft final out of long deliberations. What really is meant of dignity of individual, which is very important, we shall discuss later, and we shall definitely see how the Supreme Court has from time to time gone into this and decided. Now, the preamble is one of the very important aspects of our constitution. Justice Desai, while delivering judgment in D.S. Nakarai, one of the very important judgment in our constitutional history, says this, quote, "The preamble, which is the floodlight illuminating the path to be pursued by the state." I repeat, the preamble, which is the floodlight illuminating the path to be pursued by the state, now expresses the high ideal of socialism. The principal aim of socialist state is to eliminate inequality in income and status and standards of life. Basic framework of socialism is to provide a decent standard of life to the working people, and especially economic security from cradle to the grave. It was such a socialist state which the preamble directs the center of power, legislative, executive, and the judiciary to set up. From a wholly feudal society to a vibrant, throbbing socialist welfare society is a long march, but during this long journey to the fulfillment of the goal, every state action, whenever taken, must be directed and must be so interpreted as to take society one step towards the goal. Then he says, in a socialist constitution, workers may not be conceived as mere vendors of the toil or marketable commodities to be purchased by owners of capital. Workers are producers of wealth as much as capital, nay, very much more. Capital would be impotent without labor. Therefore, they are equal partners with capital in the enterprise. The preamble and directive principle thus construed yield unmistakably the conclusion that the enterprise, which is a center of economic power, should be controlled not only by capital, but also labor, especially when it is sought to demolish that center of economic power. This was also explained by Professor Upendranath Bakshi, as you know. The last quotation paragraph is from Professor Bakshi. And let us see how our Constitution interpreter, the Supreme Court, from time to time, I again go by the Supreme Court's own verdict on the issue of our democracy. Here the Supreme Court says, Justice Krishna Iyer has said, since the preamble says that we have to give social justice and economic justice, therefore social justice and the social democracy, which the court says is very important aspect of it, and how it is to be appreciated, how it is to be matured and executed, the court says, the jurisprudence of personhood or philosophy of the right to life envisioned under Article 21 enlarges its sweep to encompass human personality in its full bosom with invigorated health, which is a wealth to the workman to earn his livelihood, to sustain the dignity of person, and to live a life with dignity and equality. Can you see the word used in the preamble, dignity, is now Supreme Court trying to interpret in this way? May I, at the risk of repetition, read once again? The life enlarges its sweep to encompass human personality in its full bosom with invigorated health, which is a wealth to the workman, to earn his livelihood, to sustain the dignity of person, and to live a life with dignity and equality. The expression life assured in Article 21 does not connote mere animal existence or continued drudgery through life. It has a much wider meaning, which includes right to livelihood, better standard of living, hygienic conditions in the workplace, and leisure. This was in 1995, Supreme Court says. Then in Air India Statutory Authority, Supreme Court further repeats, quote, the concept of social justice which the Constitution of India engrafted consists of diverse principles essential for the orderly growth and development of personality of every citizen. Social justice is thus an integral part of justice in the generic sense. Social justice is a dynamic device to mitigate the sufferings of the poor, weak, Dalits, tribal, and deprived sections of the society, and to elevate them to the level of equality to live a life with dignity of person. The state should provide facilities and opportunities to enable them to reach at least a minimum standard of health, economic security, and civilized living, while sharing according to their capacity, social and cultural heritage. I repeat, this is the duty of the state. State should provide facilities and opportunities to enable them to reach at least minimum standard of health, economic security, and civilized living, while sharing according to their capacity, social and cultural heritage. Justice in preamble implies equality, consistent with the competing demands between distributive justice with those of cumulative justice. Justice aims to promote the general well-being of the community as a whole, as well as individuals' excellence. Social democracy means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principle of life, their trinity. Social justice is the goal of the Constitution, not possible to achieve without active and concerted support of persons connected with the justice dispensation system, the bench and the bar. That was with respect of the role of the quote, the social justice, equality, and dignity of persons are cornerstone of the Constitution. Social justice is a dynamic device to mitigate the sufferings of the poor, weak, Dalits, tribals, and deprived sections of the society, and to elevate them to the level of equality to live a life with dignity of person. Repeatedly, this is the version of the Supreme Court of India, who has been entrusted by the Constitution of India to explain the Constitution. These are the basic things in which our democracy has to orient. Democratic governance must ensure the fundamentals of this preamble, which has been stated by Justice Desai, is the main plank of our Indian democracy. Keeping this in mind, we have to now consider the latest position. I will not take much of your time, but the three bills which were very hurriedly introduced during a session which was known to be a very shortcut session. It was known to all that during this session there would be not much time available, not much more time available for discussion. This was a session just to have the continuity of the constitutional dictum, nothing more, nothing less. And many members even could not attend because of this pandemic. Therefore, the government which is in charge of the governing the country should not have, according to my understanding, programmed to place these important bills which they knew they could not be put into discussion. Now, these three bills, which are very small in volume, the sizes of the bills are not very big, but the title of the bills are very interesting. The one was the Farmers' Produce and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill 2020. Another was the Farmers' Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Price Assurance 2020. And the third one was much more serious and dangerous, the amendment of the Essential Commodities Act. Now, with these three bills, in substance, I am not going to discuss the clause by clause. It's not necessary. All of you are very well-read lawyers. I will just give my own understanding of the whole thing. Now, in the name of liberalizing the entire economic system, we have seen that in the present time, the government is really in the mood of selling out the national properties almost at the throwaway prices. For what? That's bigger economic issues. I will not discuss it here. But only thing during this period, the hopeful economic scenario was the agricultural economy, which had given us some sort of little bit of hope. Now they have decided to open up it to the bigger houses for doing purchase. They say that so long the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee Act, there were some deficiencies in implementing that, but there were a little bit of protection too. The agriculturists, they had their option, come to the mandi, sell their products, and that was assured by the minimum support price. As you know, India has been witnessing, very unfortunately, the suicide of farmers. The number of suicide of farmers has gone to such an extent which is quite shocking. In none of the other countries in the world, the farmers had to commit suicide just to avoid the rigors of death trap. In that background, farmers were required to be given much more protection. If I may take the cue from Justice Krishna Iyer and Justice Desai, it is the duty of the state to give protection, to provide, so that each individual with dignity to come up to the level of having a decent life, which is the part of the directive principles of the state policy. Now, in the name of amendment, they say, now the farmers will have right to sell their products in the open market. It might sound very happy note, but we have to decide with ground realities. Law is not an abstract one. Law has to be made applicable in the real life. In the real life, the farmer situation in our country is that there are maximum number of small holding farmers. The big holding farmers are very few. The majority of the farmers having 1 hectare, 2 hectares land, which they produce, keep some product as for their own consumption, and the rest they sell it to the market, the quantum of which is not very big. Now, if you throw them out in the name of liberalization, therefore you are throwing out a young boy to have a athlete competition with Bolt. Go open market, go and run with Bolt. Let us see what happens. And no, everybody knows what is going to happen. And the farmers were saying that you can sell it to the open market. That means the powerful persons who have the more capital resources, they would really put them into pressure for unequal bargaining. And unequal bargaining is also violative of the Constitution of India. As you know, in the case of workers, Brajulal Ganguly's case, the Supreme Court had said that the clause that a worker can be terminated with 3 months' notice is bad because this is arising out of unequal bargaining power. The worker has no choice. He has to just sign the dotted line to get a job. Similarly, here the poor agriculturist would not have any choice to bargain. They have to only sign the dotted line. I give you this price, accept or go, and they will go to the docks. And then they say that the farmers will have a right to go for contract farming. This is a dangerous proposition. We have seen during the British days, when the East India Company people came over here to have their trade and business, they enforced the Bengal peasantries to go for indigo cultivation and surrendered their traditional cultivation of paddy and other rabi crops. They were forced to go for indigo cultivation. Initially, they were given some benefits, and ultimately the disaster was so that it has become part of the history. That's the indigo operation, and there was mutiny on indigo cultivation. Tagore had once written, Rabindranath Tagore, all of you must be knowing, the first Nobel laureate in Asia, that in China, the British people forced the Chinese people to go for opium cultivation, forced them to become addicted to opium, and then whip them to collect tax. This was his language. Forced them to consume and then whip them to collect tax. This is the ultimate outcome of this sort of contract farming. You have to rely on the pro forma given by them, sign it or do not sign it. I could have appreciated that this option was there. Having state protection ensured that you have the definite state protection is your choice, whether you come under the state protective umbrella or you will go to the open market. That would have been most reasonable. Here, the state protection of minimum support price, which was determined by Swaminathan, we have been always demanding, I mean the peasants have been always demanding that there should be implementation of Swaminathan's commission, which said that 1.5 times would be the secured price for the farmers so that they can get the products returned for their own livelihood and for their own successful living. That protection has been taken off. The duty of the state under the social democracy, as per the Supreme Court, is to give protection. This protection is being withdrawn, number one. And then the serious thing is Essential Commodities Amendment Act, by which everything which is essential for our daily living, cereal, pulses, potatoes, onions, edible oil, they were under the protective gear of essential commodities so that the products are definitely supplied to the consumers from different government agencies and the prices are controlled. This is now withdrawn. The result is you have immense power to hoard it. More funnily, they say the government will intervene only when government finds that in some products the price has gone up to the double, and in some products it has gone up to 1.5. And therefore, you allow them to increase the price to the extent of 1.5 times in some products, in some materials, and 2 times in some materials. This carte blanche is given to them, that you can do that merrily. Government will not interfere. Government will interfere only thereafter. See the amount of exploitation which would immediately come on to the agriculturists and also to the consumers. And this has also a far-reaching effect. You see, the minimum wage is fixed by the government, the committees, in which these essential commodities is one of the component, the cost of which to be taken into account for the purpose of fixing the minimum wage. Even for the workers, even for fixing a cost of price index, which is one of the important feature of fixing dearness allowance. Therefore, while you are taking off these essential commodities control out of these materials, then they are no more essential commodity, which are the basic needs of everybody's daily living: onion, potato, edible oil, cereals. These are no more essential commodity. Therefore, the cost for those would not be taken into account for the purpose of your fixing of minimum wage, which or cost of price index fixing DA. Thereby, you are also attacking the wage of the poor workers. In some totality, these are the difficult portions. Now, in the parliament, there is some direct effect with the governance and the democracy. This bill was introduced and no opportunity was given for discussion. This is apart from the fact that the behavior of some MPs might be condemned. That is a different thing. But that does not really take away the more fundamentals of the running of the the assembly, parliament. Parliament is meant for fruitful discussion. If the members wanted for discussion, you should have allowed it. You cannot say, no, we don't have any time, therefore we pass the bill with the voice vote. This is another area where the democracy was throttled. Therefore, the concept of democracy, which is enshrined by the Constitution of India and as understood by our Supreme Court and the national leaders, unfortunately is being throttled and thwarted. These 3 bills is one of the indication thereof. This is my humble approach to you for your consideration. Thank you.
So thank you very much for introducing the subject and to lead the deliberation. Before we ask for the remarks from Ramkumar sir, or for that matter, Gordon Ram sir, sir has reached office. Yes, sir.
Sir, Bhattacharya has told about the historical perspective, and the Essential Commodities Act is concerned of 1956.
Yes.
That's after Second World War. There was a shortages. Today the scenario has changed, and then we are no longer into that the era. We have changed, and we'll have to move along with the world. Then if one takes into, probably I would have been more happy if Bhattacharya would have really come out with some figures and facts rather than on the general philosophy of Justice Krishna Iyer and all bygone eras. That's my personal opinion. Of course, I have my own limitations to express with regard to the more frankly. Probably some of our friends would deal with that. They will probably be able to enlighten.
Thank you, sir. Ramkumar sir.
To be frank, I plead ignorant of all these 3 bills. But I had no opportunity to study these bills. So I cannot say yes or no to whatever has been said regarding the historical background. All that I know of agriculture is that my family owned about 6 acres of paddy land, where paddy used to be cultivated 35 years ago. What thereafter happened was all the surrounding owners filled up their paddy land and put up houses, and now our land is encircled by house plots, high raised house plots. So it is not only unsuitable, we are not getting any agricultural workers also. So I can now claim with pride that I am the owner of 1.5 acres of useless tract of land. That is my take on agriculture and paddy. Otherwise, I have absolutely I have not studied these three bills.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Thank you, sir. And we move to Vijay to start the deliberation in the sense like the nuances of the act, because I mean the bills, the three numbers. So Vijay, please, can you set the ball rolling?
As far as the new act is concerned, see, I can only say that the existing act never gave any solution. Because the Honorable Speaker was talking about farmer suicides. If you look at Indian history of farming, the farmer suicide phenomenon started in mid-1990s after India became part of World Trade Organization. Till that point of time, we didn't have any farmer suicides in India. There was no, I mean, the kind of, it was like a epidemic kind of a situation where, especially in parts of Telangana, where the water sources are limited, and parts of Vidarbha, I think Vidarbha in Maharashtra, these are the places where there are a number of farmer suicides. This is because of, these are all a phenomenon post 1990 after Indian economy opened up. We became part of World Trade Organization. GATT was one of the, we became signatory to the GATT, where agricultural producers could be imported. The industries which were dependent on agricultural produce in India and had got all the tax swaps for setting up their industries, started importing the agricultural produce of other countries and became less dependent. See, the Act does not take away the right of the government to procure at MSP. Now the government becomes a partner or a competitor along with a private player to purchase the essential commodities if they want to. This does not take away the government's right to procure. It only enables the farmer to sell the produce at a competitive price. Now, what is being done, the central government fixes a minimum support. I can only talk about paddy because which is prevalently grown in these parts of the country. The central government minimum price comes to about 1800 rupees. 1800 rupees, the costing will be much more per quintal. Per quintal, the costing is much more than 1800 rupees. And curiously, what is said is it is a minimum support price. And even to procure that, the farmers are struggling. There is no maximum. If I have got a better quality of agricultural produce, there is no outer limit. But my agricultural produce, which is of a deficient quality, is being procured at this price. And high quality produce is also being procured at MSP. The MSP is not realistic. So we need to understand the distress in farmers from mid-90s as to what caused them. Till that point of time, there was no such phenomenon. This is what we need to see. Post-90s, even in Telangana, we have a lot of, especially after the formation of new state, a lot of irrigation activities have been taken up. There is a lot of water which is being grown in now Telangana. I was informed that it has abundant rice. So now, when there is abundant rice, let them sell the price at a market price when there is a competitor who wants to buy it. There are consumers of rice in various other parts of the world where rice is not grown. Mostly in Indians export it to North African countries like Nigeria and all the associated countries around those places. At least we can export them. The farmer becomes a trader, and as a trader, he is going to sell the price. See, we had a situation where the agricultural produce, essential commodities, were not even moving out of a local mandal. Then it was districts. Then it is the minimum support prices, the lack of private players to come and buy. The government's right to procure it, even at today, is not being taken away. I didn't understand the opposition, because the existing system, I can only say the existing system has failed. Let us look at the alternative system. It's not that that this new system is going to be a failure. Let a private player come in. Right? Private player is there in every place. Why not in agriculture? And Essential Commodities Act, as Justice Kodandram said, was at a time in 1955. We had control orders. We reached surplus in mid-90s. That is also another criteria for farmers' distress. Mid-90s, we reached surplus. The FCI godowns are overflowing. What's the point in keeping all the food grains in the country with the farmers struggling to have a livelihood? That's why there is a lot of migration happening. It's a whole lot of things that happen. Because once what happens is governments procure through civil supplies corporations here. There are Rice Millers Association. There are transport organizations. So these many factors are dependent on the farmers' produce. And they all are not the guys who work in the field. These are all, of course, they do work hard, but in a different context. But end of the day, unless you give farming a beneficial status, a status where he can maintain his livelihood or buy the consumable goods today, then people will, the entire migration might stop. There is a whole lot of social phenomenon to this. I'll tell you, because I come from an agricultural background. After the advent of India becoming part of World Trade Organization, we have coconut gardens. See, the price in 1990, because there is no MSP for coconut, the price of a coconut back in mid-90s is more or less the same today. You need to believe this. And most of the coconut farms, they are only existing by setting off their incomes to the investment to be made for maintenance of the land. I mean, I think what all I can say, I'm not saying that the new act is the best possible act, but it's a different way of looking at it. The existing system has failed. There is a mandi tax which is being collected. Agricultural produce, each state, I think it's not AP. Agricultural produce market committees are not there in other state, in Kerala, but in AP it is there. It's a major revenue generation for the states. I mean, why all these players only on the produce of an agriculture? Why not a private player come, let him sell, let him grade the quality, let him sell purchase the quality of a higher, of a better value at higher price. I think we need to, I think coming from a farming background, I would definitely encourage the new bill, because the existing system has definitely failed to address all the concerns. Back in 1990, the 1,000 coconuts used to be sold for about 10,000. Today, after 27, 28 years, it is still being sold for about 12,000 or so. So, I mean, how do agriculturists survive? If it was profitable, I may not have been speaking here. I might have continued with my agriculture because we had to move out. We had to look for other ways to. And other thing, what happened is that the labor costs have increased tremendously into the farming farming activity, not business. Because after the advent of, it's a laudable act, no doubt. Mahatma Gandhi National Minimum Guarantee Scheme, that of 2005. The minimum wages the labor costs have increased tremendously into it. Therefore, the minimum support price without reference to the labor costs which are being charged is hopelessly bad. These facts, and there is commodity trading happening. There is a commodity which is parallel to something similar to bullion market or stock market. I mean, why all this? If products are being sold as akin to stock market, let the farmer go around and sell his produce. Let him decide his best price. And government's right to procure at minimum support price is not taken away. This is all. This I thought was, I mean, if you were to look at the history of the land tenure laws, why the state's abolition was made, why Inam's abolition was made, why land ceiling was introduced, is only to make the livelihood, distribute the land, so that there is a livelihood of certain number of people are sustained because of agriculture. Because the excess land under land ceiling was being given to all these small scale, small farmers. The extents are only 2 acres, 3 acres. So for him to sustain a livelihood out of 2 acres or 3 acres, the parallel produce the mechanism to sustain the livelihood is not being given. Land is given, but the produce is not given any value. So therefore, it's a long. There are multiple issues, multi-layered issues, which are involved in this. And I would only say, from farming perspective, coming from a farming background, I would only encourage a new act which deregulates, because we are fed up with these rules and rhymes. So thank you.
Thank you, Vijay. Sir,
In Kerala, there is the additional factor also. See, the progeny of our old workers, they are no more interested in taking up farming. The literacy that is the price we pay. We pay for the fallow lands. Fallow lands lying in Kerala that's the price we are paying for the literacy. The literacy has done a very bad effect on the agricultural labor. They are not interested in agricultural labor.
I'll just add 2 more sentences. Till mid 2000s, 2004 or 2005, the agriculture was the primary sector. Now the service sector has taken over. The manufacturing sector is always the tertiary sector. It has become the third sector. But all the SOPs which are possible are being given only to the manufacturing sector. The industry, the farming industry, the agriculture is not looked at as an industry. They are always controlled. That's the thing. It's like a manufacturer, he produces, say, 1,000 TVs, and you tell him that you are supposed to sell only in this particular district and you're not supposed to go out of this particular district. I mean, how is it that you give all the SOPs, tax SOPs and everything possible, SEZs to a manufacturing industry? And why don't you recognize the fact that about 2/3 of Indian population thrive on agriculture? Give it an industry status. Give it some, I mean, the whole scheme of policies which are being taken in the name of procuring essential commodities has virtually killed the agriculture all over the country. And the downside is that the ceiling laws have failed. People who are given 2-3 acres of land have stopped, those lands have remained fallow because the doing agriculture is not feasible for them.
Fragmentation has
fragmentation, the whole idea of a 9th schedule law did not help.
You're right.
I also need.
Yes, sir.
Actually, there are many things. See, as Vijay said, so far as this particular act is concerned, in fact, it is only in aiding. It has not disturbed anything except that the barriers have been removed. Number one, the bigger players have been brought as a purchasers. The most important thing is the reality is different from the theory of Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice Krishna, the B.A. Desai, all the brilliant minds. The ground reality is different. If you see, taking from 1970 onwards, 70 land ceilings has been introduced in Andhra Pradesh. Once the land ceilings have been introduced, a family like us, where we were, my 4 fathers and his 3 fathers, like me, my 3 grandfathers and my father's children, because of the fragmentation of the land, it has become no longer viable for doing agriculture.
You're
Number
right.
one.
Right.
Second thing is, after the apart from viability, because of the various restrictions created by the state in the name of socialism or in the name of whatever empowering the individual level. Over a period of time, today there is no laborer, as Vijay pointed out, there is no agricultural laborer available.
You're right, absolutely right.
If you look at the Kerala instance, because you are there very much, the laborers who are working are not from the Kerala. They are all from Bihar, West Bengal, Bangladesh,
Assam
and Uttar Pradesh. The agricultural laborer.
Yes.
And so far as Andhra Pradesh is concerned, in both the states, thanks to the so-called government policies of giving 25 kilos of rice free for 1 rupee. And then all the things free. With the reason, everything is free. So there is no incentive for anyone to work in the fields. With the result, thousands of acres barren land is lying. With the result, just like Ram Kumar's neighbors, because there is no cultivation, there is no income, they are being converted into house site plots and being sold in real estate, and then the money is being put in banks or being used in another avenues for earning money. That is one. Then there is the one question which would arise is the so-called procurement of government which is being made, which was required in 1950s and 60s when there was a shortage, where I used to go and stand in queue with regard to the ration shop for sugar and wheat as well as the kerosene. I still remember as a child, even up to my 14th year, 15th year, I used to go and stand in queue and get the monthly ration of sugar. Today, everything is surplus. Everything is available. And market economics are playing. And then what is happening in the government? Why is government, the question people should ask oneself is, this is a question which I want you all to ponder over. Why is government is procuring when everything is available free? Why is it government giving free, having procuring 25 rupees and giving it on 1 rupee per kg,
Yes.
losing 24 rupees? See, there is a wheels within wheels. At the stage of fixation of MSP, there is a lot of money passes hands. At the stage of there is a lot of what is it called? The big sharks are the people who have got that ability to go and negotiate the price for MSP. Money changes at that stage. Then at the stage of procurement, money changes. Agricultural market committees are all so many built and they have been lying vacant without there being a facilities, modern facilities. Value addition is not there for our agricultural produce. We are not selling value addition. Entire of Europe survives only on grass and milk. But are they selling milk? They are not selling milk. They convert into a commodity called cheese. They name it as a Kerala cheese, they name it as a Tamil Nadu cheese, or they name it as a Kottayam cheese. And they will add some masala there. After 5 years, 10 rupees, suppose if it is 10 rupees per milk, instead of selling 10 rupees milk, they sell it after 5 years at 5,000 rupees. They have the facilities they have created. The system has created to grow. Whereas our agricultural produce, they will have to sell only as a produce. And then what is it? Why is it being procured? Procuring for the purpose of giving for free distribution. And there at every stage, there is a money changes. If you look at the taxes which are being, or the fees in the name of fees, agricultural market committee is being collected, thousands of crores of rupees money lying with them, that money is being leveraged by the respective governments for their kitties rather than for the agricultural development. One has to take the statistics, it will come out, all these things will come out. And if you look at the money which changes in the hands at every stage, from procurement at the stage of from the agriculturist to at the first stage, thereafter transportation contracts, thereafter storage contract, thereafter conversion into the saleable commodity contract, thereafter storing of those things in the godowns. At every stage, big sharks take the money. Big sharks are the ones who make the money, not the individual agriculturist. Agriculturist, the minute he sells his product, there ends the matter, cut off. Thereafter, nothing comes.
He continues, yes. He continues to be the loser.
No, he just sells the paddy. He just sells the initial first product. at the whatever price.
Levy price. Is it not?
No, there's no levy. The beauty is there's no levy. MSP even at MSP. And the so-called 1 acre, 2 acres are not viable agriculturists. People who sit in cities, they talk about 1 acre cultivation, 2 acre cultivation. Today, 1 acre, 2 acre cultivation doesn't work. It doesn't produce the food for oneself. It has to be the large-scale farming only will work ultimately. Yes. That's the reality, whether you like it or not. We still are living in the old, whatever is the one calls it as. Anyhow, that's the one point of opinion, as Bhattacharya has said right very beginning. Each one will have one opinion, but it has to be more emphatic. The actual statistics based. In fact, I think some material is available. The agriculture market committees charge about 6% commission for at the stage of procurement. And in between, there are people who that take it to many of the agriculturists, they sell it at their farmhouse in advance. Like we had a orange garden. We used to sell even at the stage of flowering because we don't have the cash and we have no capacity to hold.
Thank you, Justice Kodandaram, for those remarks. And we recognize the presence of Justice Ramakrishnan sir also. And before we go back to anyone else, we'll have the academician's viewpoint. We have Dr. Joseph Jacob here. Jacob Joseph, please.
One minute, Shyam.
Sure.
I won't take this.
No issues. Vijay, go ahead.
If you look at Shimla apples, the Shimla apples were the only apples available in country prior to 1990. And they used to have a good value. Quality. Now you have Washington apples dumped through the year, wax coated, and you have kiwi apples, green apples.
Yes.
Which are not very, for me, they're not very tasty, but the branding goes like they are kiwi apples, XYZ, New Zealand apples, green apples. And you have articles coming up saying that they are very good for health. Shimla apple is good for health, you won't find an article. Washington apple only is good for health. Green apples only are good for health. And they're always found. This is all the marketing technology. Olive oil is suddenly very healthy. Why olive oil? Because it's produced in a particular country, particular zone. So they market it. And as Honorable Kodandaram has said, Justice Kodandaram, you created a pizza for cheese. So they marketed pizza and they sold cheese. See, these are all things which keep happening. And where is the value for the local produce? Thank you. That's all. I'll stop there. This is quite an emotional issue for anybody who comes from a farming background.
Absolutely correct. Dr. Jacob Joseph, please.
Thank you, Advocate Shyam Pathman, for this opportunity. Well, I'm a legal academic. I'm not a farmer, nor I'm a practitioner, but I'll try to look at some of the issues that comes to my mind and just throw upon certain questions. That is all. Because in the light of some of the views that have been aired by some of our learned friends. Well, one point that that touched me when I perused some of these legislations, have not had the opportunity to go deep into this legislation, is now most of the people were talking about surplus, and all the discussions in the media and the public society at large is about surplus and other aspects. But when we look at the definitional clauses in this, the two bills particularly, the Farmers Produce and the Farming Agreement Acts particularly, we'll find that the definition of the farmers produce is much, much wider than we would imagine it to be. Right? We are talking about cereals and pulses in the context of maybe scarcity or the abundance of stocks that we have. But vegetables, fruits, nuts, sugarcane, and fish, products of fishery, and cattle fodder, all these would come within the ambit of the term farmers produce as defined in the two acts. One should keep in mind these aspects also, because that can be, I'm just, because I don't have the statistics with me. So, you try to look at it with the statistics and see whether all the things that would come within the coverage of the term farmers produce in the two acts are available in abundance in our country. There comes the relevance of the Essential Commodities Act. So Essential Commodities Act, again, we are talking about abundance, and what is the relevance of Essential Commodities Act, which was enacted in 1955 in this point of time of history of India, where we have abundance of food stocks. Well, Essential Commodities Act, you should keep in mind the fact that Essential Commodities Act is not only a legislation intended to prevent hoarding or something of that sort. It is intended to ensure equitable distribution and very many other aspects, and also availability of produce at fair price. Availability of produce at fair price, and ensuring that availability of produce at fair price is also an objective of the Essential Commodities Act. And various state governments, including that of Kerala, have issued a number of orders under the Essential Commodities Act to ensure the availability of produce at fair price, and they can take actions from time to time also. So
now commodities are not available and no fair price also. Can you get kerosene?
So that is a point. So the point that I'm trying to drive home is that if you look into the economic survey that was published before the budget, the recent last budget, you'll find that in that one of the arguments that have been raised about the need to abolish the the Essential Commodities Act is that Essential Commodities Act has become redundant, firstly, and secondly, no prosecutions and actions have been taken under the Essential Commodities Act based on statistics. I don't have right now with me that document. They try to argue that Essential Commodities Act has not been invoked much, and that is what the statistics reveal. So that is because of the fault of the administration or the persons who are supposed to enforce the law. But the relevance of Essential Commodities Act comes also in the context of ensuring produce at fair price. That is very, very important. And when you try to look at from that angle, if you look at Section 7, subsection 2, Section 7, subsection 2 of the Farming Agreement Act, second act, you will find that farming, the Honorable Speaker, Bhattacharya Saab, was talking about the Essential Commodities Amendment Act, and when can the government intervene when there is a increase of price above a particular benchmark. That is when you take the Essential Commodities Act singularly, right? But when you try to read the Essential Commodities Act as amended by the 2020 Amendment Act, and Section 7, subsection 2 of the Farming Agreement Act, it goes on to say that Section 7, subsection 2 goes on to say that all farming produce that has been procured through a farming agreement is totally exempted from the scope of the Essential Commodities Act. So that means even if the Essential Commodities Act exists, the concerned administrators or the agencies which are supposed to take action under the Act will not be able to take action against a farming produce that has been procured by the concerned trader or agency through a farming agreement. So that is, you are totally excluding that farming produce from the purview of the Essential Commodities Act itself. So that is another question that I would try to throw open. And still another thing is, you are talking about Kerala and Manipur. And there are some other states. Bihar has abolished it. Kerala and Manipur never had one, APMC Act. So one of the important objectives of the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act, as it is stated in the preamble and also in the speeches made by those ministers who introduced it, etc., is that to liberate the farmers from the stronghold of the APMC system. So the trade area has been defined in the Act, and trade area has been defined as an area outside the APMC markets and market committee structures. So market committees will still remain, they continue to operate, but farmers are given the freedom to trade outside this APMC system, that's all, right? So that freedom is given to the farmers through this Farmers Trade and Commerce Act, Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act. So when you try to look at states, I'm from Kerala, so when you try to look at from the perspective of Kerala or another state that does not have the APMC Act, well, this first legislation may not have may not appear to be that relevant. But the point that I'm trying to drive home is that Kerala today is more than an agricultural state, is a consumer state. So that is a point that I'm trying to drive home. Today, Kerala is a consumer state. So from people from Kerala, you'll have to try to look at this legislation, not only from a farmer's perspective, but in a blended manner, from a consumer perspective, because these farmers themselves are also consumers of many of the farming produce, right? And together with that, if the minimum support price system is not continued, the government guarantees, let's believe the government for the time being that they will continue with it, that's well and good. And if they continue with it, that's well and good. But there again, the minimum support price system for Kerala, in Kerala, only paddy or rice is procured. You don't have procurement in respect of any other farming produce. So that again is very interesting. But very recently, from November 1st, the government of Kerala is going to introduce MSP for selected vegetables and fruits. So that is a welcome development that is happening from the state government of Kerala. So that is a state initiative, leave it apart. But from the procurement perspective, only paddy is procured from the state of Kerala and no other produce is procured. So you're trying to look at the procurement, more than that, we have tried to look at it from a consumer perspective also, and taken these two acts, taken together with the amendments in the Essential Commodities Act, the implications that it would have on the common man or the middle class or the lower middle class population of the state, and even maybe other states have also to be examined in a broader perspective. And I don't think fishery, product of fishery is a farmers produce under this act. I don't think fishery produces a surplus in our country. So you may have to examine that critically in that perspective. I'm not opposing this legislations, but we need to have a balanced view. There are pitfalls in the legislation, and also there are positives to it. You are empowering the farmer to engage in transaction, but there again, support of this system is very much required. You are talking about an electronic transfer and transaction platform. The Farmers Trade and Commerce Act says that the trade will be conducted through an electronic trade and transaction platform, which will be a wholly integrated online system. So you need to look at whether our farmers today are capable, particularly the real farmers, the rural farmers, they're capable of exploiting the benefits of this electronic transfer and transaction platform. Which is a networked online platform. So the state governments and other agencies may have to chip in to provide them some assistance in using it and exploiting the benefits. Then again, dispute resolution. The dispute resolution takes place through a conciliation board and thereafter through the SDM. Are our farmers capable of advancing their cause before these platforms? What kind of legal support will the governments give, state or central governments give? Is it feasible to support all the farmers? Can agencies like KELSA and other legal services authorities and other agencies chip in to help the farmers? So it's a very great challenge that lays before the state and central government and other agencies and other components of the justice delivery system also to help our farmers to reap the benefits of this legislation also. And one more point, and then I'll conclude, particularly with the farming agreement. Well, land is a state subject. Land use would become particularly relevant because Bhattacharya sir was talking about the case of indigo, right? So there is a concern among scientists, some of the scientists and conservationists and environmentalists, etc., that the farming agreement system may lead to monocropping, where large stretches of land may be cultivated by a single crop. So biodiversity, agro-biodiversity is very, very, very significant in the context of the future of our country and of the world also, right? So monocropping is related to land use. So the state governments may have to chip in that context and come out with appropriate policies or interventions to ensure that the implementation of the farming agreement do not result in monocropping or other kinds of consequences which would result in crop diversity, loss of crop diversity, or loss of agro biodiversity, which can be suicidal for the agricultural sector and also for the environmental sustainability in general. With these few words, I'm concluding. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob Joseph. And Ramachandran sir, I think he was here. This is Ramachandran sir. I think he just left. Okay. Prem, just your remarks, and then we'll get back to the speaker immediately so that we can wind up the session.
Well, I have heard the speaker say, but at the same time, see, when if one is opposing, but again, you should think of the advantages also. Now, this private trade in these agricultural commodities, it is not something which is new to India. The justification for all these statutes at this particular point of time is primarily, I think, to facilitate bigger private players, let them come into the farm sector. And there may be several other reasons also, because the government's justification, it is hinged on the farmers getting better prices for their produce, because they are going to get greater choices also. And the farmers, at least, see, farmers also, you can classify them into, say, like, there may be very small scale farmers, there may be big scale farmers. It all depends. So, at least the persons who stand at the middle and towards the top, and the net surplus producers, they may not, of course, they may not seem convinced. The reason is that the market prices, or rather what I call the farmer's income, it is not simply dependent upon the market structure. The organizations are concerned, the demands are being ignored, particularly during this difficult economic situation. And the market prices, they particularly maybe they tend to become sluggish at times. And see, as Justice Kodandaramman was pointing out, see, right now we are not in 1965. As we know, the Food Corporation was formed during 1965. That is as a response to significant food shortage in the country. Now we have made severe progress in the food production, but still can we say that even despite, say, around 55 years, the problem is hunger is not addressed even still, right? You cannot straitjacket everything. There are advantages and there are disadvantages. And of course, there are certain shortcomings to that, because certain regulatory bodies and all, that of course the central government, they may come up with the rules also. So let us see what's in store. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prem. Jayman, you want to add something before we go to Ranjan sir?
No, it's okay.
Okay, sir. We would like to have your comments on this.
See, I was very brief. I had introduced the subject. Definitely, I have spoken the philosophy of the Constitution. I am shocked to hear that these are bygone days. If somebody feels with due respect that the constitutional principle is a matter of bygone days, then the Indian democracy has gone. And that's the way the ruling classes are leading us to. Therefore, you must be very careful about this. Secondly, the apprehensions or the elucidation which comes from big farmers' point of view. Let us not forget that the entire country is not dependent on big farmers who can challenge with the big traders. We have to think as a whole, philosophically and economically, keeping in mind the majority of the people, the poor farmers. In this connection, the issue of abundance comes. I am sorry to say, why does the abundance? People of India are not properly fed. The minimum calorie fixed by the World Health Organization, which is necessary for an individual to survive, Indian government could not supply this minimum calorie food to its citizens. And you are talking about abundance. This is really short of others. We are not in abundance. The prices in which the commodities are available in the market is approachable by only people like you and me, not the common man. See, one pandemic has given us a lesson that the state protection is necessary. Throughout the country, there are so many private hospitals. Do you get the assistance during your pandemic if you suffer from COVID? Are you happy with the private arrangement? Or you have to again go back to the government agency? You are crying home. the government extend its health facilities. Private cannot. Similarly, question of education. Now there are huge private players in education. Now you find the guardians are on the street that they cannot pay the fees. Therefore, the state education system is much more important. The protection of state for larger community is very much essential and need of the hour. This present act, which have been enacted, would ultimately throw these small farmers into the face of the sharks. They will eat them up, and ultimately we will suffer. Now we are very happy that apples are coming from outside countries. We are importing them. That means, what does it indicate? It indicates that we are not really encouraging our farmers to produce it. This is the fundamental duty. Give the security to the farmers, and it's the duty of the state. If the farmers are given the appropriate security, they will produce for the entire countrymen, not for a particular sector. That should be the philosophy of the governance, and that is democracy. Therefore, the basic principle of constitutional preamble has to be kept in mind while taking each and every governing step. Otherwise, we will be doomed. That's my conclusion to the subject.
Sir, let me ask you just one thing, because you were on saying that the preamble to the constitution, that has to be kept in mind while addressing the issue. Now, let me ask you one thing. Just tell me, how does any of these three statutes become unconstitutional? Under which article?
You see, everything is not unconstitutional. Everything is against the constitutional basic principle. Unconstitutional is something else. And if you take a law which ultimately takes away your basic concept of social and economic justice, that becomes immoral. One is constitutional morality, one is constitutional legality. These two are different things.
But sir, when it stands the muster of part 3 of the constitution, automatically it becomes constitutional. And anything that is constitutional, that is on par or maybe above the preamble. I mean the preambular motto which has been set forth. Because the preamble that already forms up, see, that of course is one of the biggest, one of the biggest aids for interpreting a constitution. And part 3, that is the most important or the sacred part, which we call the basic human rights. Right? Any statute that has to pass the muster first under Article 13, and then the whole sweep of part 3 comes into play. Now, just tell me any single article which gets infringed by any of the sections of any of these 3 enactments. Absolutely no.
You see,
because it passes the muster.
You see, the keeping people under detention without any cause is constitutional, but this is immoral. Therefore, we have to always think from that angle. And if you on that issue, we can have a debate, fix up another date, I'm prepared to go for debate.
That of course. It is just like what Justice Nagamuthu used to say, you are entitled to your opinion, we are entitled to our opinion. So all of us have different opinion. That's the beauty of a democracy and this platform. So thank you very much for spending your time. And yes, Vijay, please.
Yeah, because honorable member spoke about abundance, that there is no abundance in this country. See, there is an export of rice to various countries. Indians export rice. I think if there is no abundance, we won't be exporting rice.
Exporting at the cost of our life, at the cost of our food.
Sir, I am only trying to bring a fact. I am trying to only bring a fact that there is an export and there is an import of certain other agricultural produce. It's only that there's no restriction for the government to make an import. Even today, there's no restriction because most of the wheat comes from various other countries like Soviet Union and Australia. We don't because onions come from Pakistan. You buy it, nobody is stopping the government from buying it, procuring it from other countries, feed everybody. But at what cost? By marginalizing one section of the persons who produce. That may not be the right way. I've just not finished it.
I am with you that the marginalization of this sector is not welcome. But that solution is not export and import. Solution is to encourage them to produce more.
Sir, we have failed so far. So let us try a new one. That's all I can say. Sir, before I close, Sir, most of the governments today give laptops, cell phones, everything for saying that these are all, because the UP government had given it in 2012 or so. Many other governments have been giving it. There is no MSP. There is no control over it. Whatever the price which the manufacturer produces,
incompatible platforms.
Oh, yeah, because once the government is procuring, because the idea is procuring, they think at that point of time these are the most essential ones. TVs have been distributed, thousands of TVs have been, mixes have been distributed.
Marginalized sections, sir. Let us consider.
See, government's policy of procurement should be uniform with regard to agricultural or non-agricultural. You think something is essential, you don't fix an MSP. You buy it at a price which he offers. And as far as merely because he's a marginalized farmer.
Not merely because, that's a fundamental. But not merely because, that's more fundamental. As a human being, you also lie with them. As everybody.
We can always agree to disagree. But, sir, when you buy those things, procurement policy should be uniform both for agricultural produce and non-agricultural produce. Why buy it at a price which they sell and dictate a price for a farmer? I don't find...
No dictating price. The farmers are...
MSP, there is no produce, my lord, sir.
Support, not dictation. It's support.
Sir, there is no...
Go below.
Sir, true, but is there any maximum? Is there any history that... Sir, let us go by statistics. Did any government procure above MSP? Say about 100 rupees or 200 rupees above MSP? Nothing.
The government will procure at the minimum price. If the purchaser purchases the higher price...
Sir, that's what I'm trying to say. All the sale happens at minimum support price. There is no... See, it is not minimum support price, it is maximum support price. It is the maximum support price, it's not minimum. They are misleading everybody saying that it is minimum support. That's the maximum which a person can get.
Okay, that is the minimum amount they will be paying, that's all.
Nothing more than that.
Because there can't be distress sale. That is to prevent distress sale. The reality is something, the agriculture has to throw away their price. They are throwing away their product on the road. They are not getting price. That's why the government minimum support price. Now if the restriction is taken off, they will not go for cultivation. You can live without a computer, but you can't live without food.
All right. Let us see how it shapes up.
Anyway, very interesting session. Thank you, Jayman Andrews, for bringing this wonderful speaker to us. And thank you, sir, for introducing the subject. Maybe we require a system where poor will always remain poor and rich will remain always rich, or rather the way in which it was introduced or who introduced matters in this country for opposing or accepting. It happens not just in the center, sir. It happens in in states also. Maybe there are different nuances to it than what we would like to see. In this platform, which is just academic, we were only on these aspects further and what we are to know in the legal perspective, sir. So that brings us to the end of the 126th session. Tomorrow in the 127th session, we are dealing with an entirely different subject about Justice RBG, who recently died. The topic being impressive bequests of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the civil rights gladiator. The topic will be introduced by our Premraj, and the subject will be dealt with by Advocate Neema Noor Mohammed. She is the Assistant Public Prosecutor, Government of NCT of Delhi. And all of us will be free to participate so that we will know.
Is it 3:30 or 4 o'clock?
Regular time, 3:30, sir. 3:30. Today we had to, because we never knew that COVID would play havoc to us. Thank you very much, Bhattacharya ji. And we are also thankful to Justice.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Justice Ramkumar. Thank you, Coordinator Ram sir, Ramushan sir, and all of you, and Vijay and Dr. Jacob. Special thanks for highlighting those aspects so that there will be a balanced discussion in this on this house, or rather a platform. Thank you very much. Let us all stay safe and hunger free till tomorrow. We meet again 3:30.